Chapter 20. Daniel's and Prescott's minds worked by fallen angels. In the same year in which Jones went into apostasy, Satan prepared for his next round of attacks on the church. In October of 1907, two former publishing house directors, John Colvard and Moses Kellogg, published a volume attacking the Adventist interpretation of Daniel 8, and especially Uriah Smith's interpretation of the daily. Prescott was asked to write a rebuttal, but Prescott agreed with the substance of what Colvard and Kellogg had written, and so declined. Loughborough stepped in to provide the rebuttal article, but when he submitted it for publication to Prescott, who was the review editor at that time, he rejected it.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 218.
At the same time, Haskell submitted his updated edition of the story of Daniel the prophet, but Prescott advised him to change his position on the daily in Daniel 8.
In his letter, the professor had remarked that it would only be a matter of time before the present teaching on the daily will be discarded, and incautiously added, the sooner the better. It was a bold but highly unpalatable prediction, and Haskell could not stomach it. We ought to understand such expressions by the aid of the spirit of prophecy. In this way, all points are to be solved. Prescott remained unconvinced. The battle had commenced.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 218.
After the reorganization of the church, which was desperately needed to address the kingly power of a few men in the late 1890s, Daniels and Prescott played a central role in steering the denomination out of excessive debt, as well as navigating the trauma of the loss of Kellogg, Jones, and Waggoner. Still, Daniels and Prescott had embittered several other church leaders by their firm approach to issues. The subject of the daily was bound to bring out animosity because of its connection to the foundations of the Adventist movement. For Prescott to reject Haskell's updated book, a man who was a foundational pioneer, on a subject that neither side had a complete grasp on, was an overreach. It is true that Haskell needed to do more than simply stand on past positions. He needed to present the daily in the context of the 1888 message. Prescott did have legitimate questions that the pioneers had not addressed, but it was not his place to shut down one of the pioneers in the manner he did. Haskell earnestly desired an interview with Ellen White to clear up the matter. Willie White informed Prescott of Haskell's intentions. Prescott asked to delay any presentation to Ellen White until Daniels could come and present the subject properly, as he and Daniels understood the question.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 219.
Since the days of 1888, when the old guard accused Ellen White of being influenced by Jones, Waggoner, and Willie her son, the church now had to manage who could get to speak to Ellen White for fear she would be influenced in the wrong direction. All this speaks of the continuing fallout from the lack of confidence men now had in the prophetic gift. Men on both sides tried to manipulate it to their advantage. Leaders appeared to approach Ellen White as Balak approached Balaam, seeking the prophet to curse their enemies. They just needed to get her into the right position to see things as they did, and then she would rebuke their enemies and declare them victorious. To Prescott's credit, he was disappointed that M.C. Wilcox printed an article in the Signs of the Times containing the new view of the daily. He didn't wish to inflame the opposition before the question had been thoroughly considered. A meeting was held on January 26, 1908, in one of Ellen White's offices at Elmshaven. The participants were Haskell, Haskell's wife, and Loughborough on one side, and Chrysler, W.C. White, D.E. Robinson, Daniels, and Prescott on the other. Prescott dominated the meeting, speaking for 4 hours before letting Haskell and Loughborough respond. Presenting information for 4 hours straight without allowing a response leads to weariness of mind. He assumed a position in the meeting that was disrespectful to the older men. Interestingly, Ellen White was not present. Sadly, the next day, Haskell wrote a strong letter to Daniels against Prescott. As Haskell was still operating in the framework of counterfeit justice, with a view that God judges, condemns, and destroys, he was not in a position to mount a solid response. He stood on the early writing statement and the 1843 chart. While in California, Prescott networked successfully with W.C. White, Chrysler, M.C. Wilcox, and O.A. Tate. They all felt satisfied with Prescott's argument that Ellen White's early writing statement on the daily was only addressing time setting. Having secured their support, Prescott left California with an agreement from Willie White that he was clear to proceed with a new exposition of Daniel 8 in the Review and Herald. When we compare the early writing statement with what Ellen White originally wrote, we find that the assertions of Prescott are not the case.
Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily, but since 1844, in the confusion, other views have been embraced, and darkness and confusion has followed.
New paragraph.
The Lord showed me that time had not been a test since 1844, and that time will never again be a test. Present Truth, November 1st, 1850, paragraphs 12 and 13.
Ellen's reference to time was originally published in a new paragraph, suggesting a new thought was initiated. It was published the following year within the same paragraph, but it was still expressed as, "I have also seen," again suggesting a new thought being expressed.
Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily, but since 1844, in the confusion, other views have been embraced, and darkness and confusion have followed. I have also seen that time had not been a test since 1844, and that time will never again be a test. A sketch of the Christian experience and view of Ellen White, 1851. The Gathering Time, page 61.2.
The final statement published in early writings appeared as follows.
Then I saw in relation to the daily, Daniel 8:12, that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily, but in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced, and darkness and confusion have followed. Time has not been a test since 1844, and it will never again be a test. Early Writings, page 74.2, 1882.
The early writing statement presents the element of time as the conclusion of the whole paragraph. What Ellen White originally wrote presents time as a separate but related issue. Why was there a change in the wording? Did Ellen White change it later? Was it an incidental adjustment made for space constraints, or an editorial summary that didn't seem to affect the content at the time? As we shall discover, she could not recollect the issue at play at the time. The spirit of prophecy shouldn't settle doctrinal issues, but it does provide a framework and pointers that assist in Bible study. Haskell and Loughborough were involved in Adventism not long after the quote was written, and they held their understanding of it their entire career, which is telling for how the quote was understood by the pioneers. To suggest that the words "nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily" excludes the principle of paganism is a sign of desperation to evade the obvious meaning. In the context of false justice and the 1888 message, the principle of paganism, is the most obvious choice and offers further proof of how solid a foundation was laid in the Adventist movement. Haskell learned of the intended series of articles when it was announced in the March 5th issue of the Review. Haskell prepared for war, indicating to Willie White that he would circulate the 1843 chart as evidence of the old view. Strangely, Willie White informed Prescott that he had forgotten to give him a letter from Ellen White, who had some things presented to her cautioning Prescott not to proceed with his plans in the Review just now. So, Prescott held off writing until further word came. Daniels went to Ellen White to lay out the matter before her as he and Prescott understood it. Ellen White sat with the 1843 chart in her lap as he spoke. When Daniels attempted to explain the new view of the daily, Daniels stated that Ellen White would go into the twilight zone and could not comprehend the points raised. She told Daniels that she had no special light on the matter. Why didn't the Lord reveal this to her if it was vital for the church to change its position? Why didn't she get behind Prescott and Daniels like she got behind Waggoner and Jones in 1888, confirming the Bible study they had done?
Footnote. Valentine, Prescott, page 224.
Daniels reported to Prescott that Ellen White stated that she had no light on the question, which they understood meant they could press ahead. But Ellen White had sent Prescott a letter warning him that he was in danger.
There are constant dangers besetting the pathway of God's servants, and these dangers we may learn to avoid. At times, Elder Prescott, you have come very near making shipwreck of your faith. Only the grace of God and the confidence you have had in the messages He has sent through the spirit of prophecy have held you back. I was shown that although you have had many years of experience in the cause of God, you are still in danger of making grave mistakes. You will be inclined to catch hold of some minor matter which you consider to be important and place great weight upon it. At such times, Satan is waiting and watching for an opportunity to influence your mind and through you to work upon many other minds, leading them to questioning and doubt. The Lord has not called you to such a work as this. Upon some questions, silence will reveal a spirit of wisdom and discretion. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 23, Letter 166, 1908, paragraphs 5 and 6.
The way the Lord impressed Ellen White to write was to suggest to Prescott that what he was engaging in was of minor importance, but that if he pursued the matter, it could allow Satan to influence his mind. I believe Dennis Hoekemer rightly assesses the situation when he says,
Ellen White's insistence on calling the daily issue an unimportant, trivial distraction indicates that she sided with the old view. New view advocates could hardly be consistent in calling the issue trivial, since on their interpretation the daily became Christ's righteousness, the heavenly sanctuary, or the gospel. Could any Christian call that trivial or unimportant?
Footnote. Hoekemer, Pagan Foundations, page 26.
Ellen White prepared 2 more letters to be sent to Prescott. They were dated June 24th and July 1st of 1908. The letters were delayed in being sent. We might speculate as to why, but hadn't Prescott received enough clues already? Like Balaam, who really wanted to go to Balak, the angel allowed him to go, not because God wanted him to go, but because Balaam was determined. Prescott finally received the letters in August 1910, when the controversy was at its height.
Footnote. Valentine, Prescott, page 225.
The message followed the same theme as the previous letter, but this time she warned him of his association with Waggoner and Waggoner's demise. She then restated,
You are now in danger of occupying time and energy with certain points upon which you seem to have clear light. But I am charged to say to you that it will be better for you to keep silent regarding this subject. To devote so much attention to the jots and tittles will open the way for controversy regarding the truth we hold dear and bring in a large amount of criticism which need not exist. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 23, Letter 224, 1908, paragraph 4.
In the second letter, Ellen White directly addresses Prescott on the daily.
It will prove to be a great mistake if you agitate at this time the question regarding the daily, which has been occupying much of your attention of late. Daniel 8:11-13. I have been shown that the result of your making this question a prominent issue would be that the minds of a large number will be directed to an unnecessary controversy, and that questioning and confusion will be developed in our ranks. Cannot you see that if this question is agitated now, that minds would be unfavorably impressed, and that many who should be seeking most earnestly for the saving grace of Christ would be drawn into controversy? And there are some who would make capital of this matter to turn souls away from the truth. My brother, let us be slow to raise questions that will be a source of temptation to our people. I have had no special light on the point presented for discussion, and I do not see the need of this discussion. But I am instructed to tell you that this small matter, upon which you are concentrating your thought, will become a great mountain unless you determine to let it alone. I have been instructed that the Lord has not placed upon you the burden you are now carrying regarding this matter, and that it is not profitable for you to spend so much time and attention in its consideration. You are not using wisely the time God is giving you by thus devoting it to such jots and tittles, when you can be speaking words that will confirm the people of God in the faith they hold. God has not placed upon any of his ministers the work of sowing seeds that will produce confusion and unbelief. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 23, Letter 226, 1908, paragraphs 4 and 5.
The mountain that Prescott and Daniels eventually did create was to place the denomination in an impossible position to defend the date 1844, the date intimately linked to the very foundation of the Adventist faith. This instability would simmer for decades and finally explode into the Desmond Ford crisis of 1980. 2 weeks after writing to Prescott about dropping the daily issue, she wrote to Haskell about her concerns that the testimonies were being undermined.
Footnote: Letters and Manuscripts. Volume 23, Letter 204, 1908.
She writes to him with confidence and without restraining his activities. The following year, after another clash over the daily at the 1909 General Conference session held May 13th to June 1st, 1909, Ellen had another message for Prescott.
The Lord is not pleased with the spiritual advancement that Elder Prescott has made. He is not where the Lord would have him be. He would be the recipient of much greater spiritual strength if he were much of the time out in the field, seeking to lead souls to the light of truth. Brother Prescott, your ministerial ability is needed in the work that God requires shall be done in our cities. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 24, Manuscript 41, 1909, paragraph 3.
Around the beginning of 1910, Willie White, a New View advocate, wrote to Haskell indicating what he believed to be the key problem.
White also wrote a long letter to Haskell urging restraint and setting out the way the church should handle disputes. The daily itself was not now the real problem. The two bigger questions that W.C. White felt needed straightening out were, 1, attitudes between leaders and other members, and 2, how the church should or should not use his mother's writings.
Footnote: Valentine, Prescott, page 232.
Later that year, a testimony comes from Ellen White, which turned the tide for the New View advocates and is the go-to statement for many who wish to support the New View.
I have words to speak to my brethren east and west, north and south. I request that my writings shall not be used as the leading argument to settle questions over which there is now so much controversy. I entreat of elders H, I, J, and others of our leading brethren that they make no reference to my writings to sustain their views of the daily. It has been presented to me that this is not a subject of vital importance. I am instructed that our brethren are making a mistake in magnifying the importance of the difference in the views that are held. I cannot consent that any of my writings shall be taken as settling this matter. The true meaning of the daily is not to be made a test question. I now ask that my ministering brethren shall not make use of my writings in their arguments regarding this question, the daily, for I have had no instruction on the point under discussion, and I see no need for the controversy. Regarding this matter under present conditions, silence is eloquence. Selected Messages, Volume 1, page 164.1-3.
Bert Holoviak makes the interesting point.
The testimony dated July 31st, 1910 was significantly entitled, Our Attitude Toward Doctrinal Controversy. Since Mrs. White ordinarily placed no titles upon testimonies, it seems quite possible that W.C. White placed that significant title on the testimony.
Footnote. Bert Holoviak, In the Shadow of the Daily, 1979, page 56.
In light of this, Hokama points out,
When the Daily War heated up, Ellen White was in her 80s with an apparently diminished capacity to understand complicated matters. This may be inferred from a 1918 letter by Haskell to W.C. White in response to the latter's claim regarding his mother's enfeebled mental state during her later years. If I believed even what you have told me about having to tell your mother the same thing over 3 or 4 times in order that she might get a clear idea of things so that she could give a correct testimony on some points, it would weaken my faith mightily, not in your mother, but in what comes from her pen. November the 27th, 1918, W.E.D.C. If this is true, and there is considerable circumstantial evidence to support this position, it puts an entirely different light on her carefully worded, cautiously neutral, definitively ambiguous daily statement of July 31st, 1910. This was the document that began to turn the tide in favor of Willie and his exiled allies, Prescott and Daniels.
Footnote. Hokema, Pagan Foundations, page 25.
did Willie's concern for the burden placed on his mother influence him to find a shortcut out of this vortex? It is true that this issue was weighing heavily upon her. It is also true that the old view advocates were often acting in enmity. But we must place that against the testimony that Ellen White gave concerning Daniels and Prescott in 1910 that is often, possibly always, ignored, especially by those favoring the new view.
At this stage of our experience, we are not to have our minds drawn away from the special light given us to consider at the important gathering of our conference, and there was Brother Daniels, whose mind the enemy was working, and your mind and Elder Prescott's mind were being worked by the angels that were expelled from heaven. Satan's work was to divert your minds that jots and tittles should be brought in which the Lord did not inspire you to bring in. They were not essential. But this meant much to the cause of truth, and the ideas of your minds, if you could be drawn away to jots or tittles, is a work of Satan's devising. To correct little things in the books written, you suppose would be doing a great work. But I am charged. Silence is eloquence. And I was shown from the first that the Lord had given neither Elders Daniels nor Prescott the burden of this work. Should Satan's wiles be brought in, should this daily be such a great matter as to be brought in to confuse minds and hinder the advancement of the work at this important period of time, it should not, whatever may be, this subject should not be introduced, for the spirit that would be brought in would be forbidding, and Lucifer is watching every movement. Satanic agencies would commence his work, and there would be confusion brought into our ranks. You have no call to hunt up the difference of opinion that is not a testing question, but your silence is eloquence. I have the matter all plainly before me. If the devil could involve any one of our own people on these subjects, as he has proposed to do, Satan's cause would triumph. Now the work without delay is to be taken up and not a difference of opinion expressed. Now when I saw how you were working, my mind took in the whole situation and the results, if you should go forward and give the parties that have left us the least chance to bring confusion into our ranks. Your lack of wisdom would be just what Satan would have it. Your loud proclamation was not under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. I was instructed to say to you that your picking flaws in the writings of men that have been led of God is not inspired of God, and if this is the wisdom that Elder Daniels would give to the people, by no means give him an official position, for he cannot reason from cause to effect. Your silence on this subject is your wisdom. Now, everything like picking flaws in the publications of men who are not alive is not the work God has given any of you to do. For if these men, elders Daniels and Prescott, had followed the directions given in working the cities, there would have been many, very many, convinced of the truth and converted, able men that now are in positions where they never will be reached. I have been instructed that such hasty movements should not have been made, such as selecting you as president of the conference even another year, but the Lord forbids any more such hasty transactions until the matter is brought before the Lord in prayer. And as you have had the message come to you that the work of the Lord resting upon the president is a most solemn responsibility, you had no moral right to blaze out as you did upon the subject of the daily and suppose your influence would decide the question. There was Elder Haskell, who has carried the heavy responsibilities, and there is Elder Irwin and several men I might mention who have the heavy responsibilities. Where was your respect for the men of age? What authority could you exercise without taking all the responsible men to weigh the matter? But let us now investigate the matter. We must now reconsider whether it is the Lord's judgment, in the face of the work that has been neglected, of showing your zeal to carry the work even another year. If you should carry the work another year with the help that shall unite with you, there should be a change take place in you and Elder Prescott, and humble your own hearts before God. The Lord will have to see in you a showing of a different experience, for if ever men needed to be reconverted at this present time, it is Elder Daniels and Elder Prescott. We are everyone to work out the work which shall glorify the Father. We have come to the crisis, either to conform to the character of Jesus Christ right in this preparatory time or not attempt it. Elder Daniels, you are not to feel at liberty to let your voice be heard on high as you have done under similar circumstances. And understand, the president of a conference is not a ruler. He works in connection with the wise men who occupy the position as presidents whom God has accepted. He has not liberty to meddle with the writings in printed books from the pens that God has accepted. They are no longer to bear sway unless they show less of the ruling, dominating power. The crisis has come, for God will be dishonored. And those who are hungering and thirsting after something new were advancing ideas so specious that Elder Prescott was in great danger. Elder Daniels was in great danger of becoming wrapped in a delusion that if these sentiments could be spoken everywhere, it would be as a new world. Yes, it would. But while their minds were thus absorbed, I was shown that Brother Daniels and Brother Prescott were weaving into their experience sentiments of a spiritualistic appearance and drawing our people to beautiful sentiments that would deceive, if possible, the very elect. I have to trace with my pen the fact that these brethren would see defects in their delusive ideas that would place the truth in an uncertainty, and yet they would stand out as if they had great spiritual discernment. Now I am to tell them that when I was shown this matter, when Elder Daniels was lifting up his voice like a trumpet in advocating his ideas of the daily, the after results were presented. Our people were becoming confused. I saw the result, and then there were given me cautions that if Elder Daniels, without respect to the outcome, should thus be impressed and let himself believe he was under the inspiration of God, skepticism would be sown among our ranks everywhere, and we should be where Satan would carry his messages. Set unbelief and skepticism would be sown in human minds, and strange crops of evil would take the place of truth. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 25, Manuscript 67, 1910, pages 1 to 8.
This document is dated as released by the White Estate in December of 1988 during a process of releasing unpublished documents. Dennis Hokama didn't mention it in his well-researched 1987 attack on the Adventist position, but no doubt would have mentioned it if he was aware of it, because it so clearly exposes the darkness that was working on Daniels and Prescott. Neither of the books on Daniels or Prescott in the Modern Adventist Biography series authorized by the SDA Church mention this statement. This also is quite telling. Satan seduced and led these men into enthroning the atonement of blood sacrifice into the heavenly sanctuary. Those who opposed the new view believed the same about the ministry of Jesus as those of the new view, except they didn't see it applying to the texts of Daniel 8:11-14. In this context, it was indeed a minor point. Having the same belief allowed Satan to stir up the enmity of many of the old view advocates of the daily against those of the new view. But while those of the old view didn't understand the significance of the daily, they were preserving the integrity of the spirit of prophecy and leaving a clue for us today that would help us see that indeed paganism was lifted up into the Christian religion and enthroned, putting a curse upon God's people that will lead many to destruction. In the correct understanding of the atonement, the pioneer view of the daily is a vital issue. There are two more pieces of evidence I wish to consider before we close this chapter. To quell the doubts that Haskell and others had about the integrity of the statement released by the White Estate in 1910 about doctrinal controversies, A.G. Daniels claimed he placed the 1843 chart and the early writing statement before Ellen White.
She replied that these features were not placed before her in vision as the time part was. She would not be let out to make an explanation of those points of the prophecy, a GD statement of September 25, 1931, WDF 201, Ellen G. White Biography. Volume 6, page 256.8.
Hokama provides the following analysis of this situation.
There are many curious things about this document, the first of which is that it was not produced in 1910. Daniels gives no date for this interview, and Arthur White couldn't produce one when he used it in the later Elmshaven years, page 256. Arthur White is usually meticulous about dating documents, but this time he cannot even provide an approximate date. It was a little later than June 1st, 1910, he writes. But this is hard to understand because it is a known fact that Daniels was refused an interview with Ellen White in late May of that year, and by June 1st he was headed back east, resigned to the idea that he might have to give up the presidency. Arthur White claims that W.C. White and C.C. Chrysler were also present at the interview but provides no documentation. Contemporary references or allusions to this interview prior to 1931 may exist but were not encountered by this writer. Even if the interview did take place when, there are indications that Ellen White's apparent neutrality on the issue was due either to intimidation by Willie White and Daniels or to their misrepresentation of her true position on the topic.
Footnote. Hokama, page 25.
The second piece of evidence is the testimony of F.C. Gilbert, which he wrote out immediately after his private interview with Ellen White. He kept it private until the year of his death, when Washburn asked him for it. I will quote the entire document, which consists of what Ellen White said to Gilbert.
An interview with Sister White at St. Helena, June 8, 1910. There was a reproof given to Daniels and Prescott at the time of the General Conference at Washington. Prescott wanted to work himself and his ideas into the minds of the people. If he did, I know that he would work himself out. We have a testing message to give to the people, and we do not want to get the people stirred up about a little item that does not affect our salvation. What they are doing is to try and work up a lot of jots and tittles. I was shown Prescott's case and saw that he ought to be engaged in better business. There was a paper presented to us that he was looking over, and he was working over it and trying to find something that was different from what other people had. There was nothing in it that was of any effect to the people, and therefore they ought to spend their time in spreading the message and in doing the work that should be done in the cities. They had to be getting up something new, and of course by doing so, they would not give the older brethren in the cause any chance to say anything that these older brethren knew about the early days of the message. In the work they are doing, they are taking up hours and hours of the time of the people, and it all does not amount to anything. We have a life and death question to settle, and what is needed is to teach the people how to meet this great vital testing message. When they did not accept my message of reproof, I knew what they would do, and I knew what Daniel's would do in getting the people all stirred up. I have not written to Prescott because his wife is so very sick, and so did not feel like writing to him at the present time. Daniel's was here to see me, and I would not see him on any point, and I would not have anything to say to him about anything. About this daily that they are trying to work up, there is nothing in it, and it is not a testing point of character. What we want is to know about the things which are vital and which affect our salvation. There is no need of anything of this kind being taken up at all with the people. They will get the people off the real vital work of the message, and there is nothing of any consequence in this thing they are agitating. I have just been writing to Elder Daniels to get the work done in the cities. This is the work that ought to be done, and they are not to bother with these other things. When I was at Washington, there seemed to be something that just encased their minds, and I could not seem to touch them. We are to have nothing to do with this question of the daily. We are to have our minds on more vital points of the message. When I gave them my message and saw the way they treated it, I knew that the Lord would work against them. I knew they would work against my message, and then the people would not think there was anything in my message. They are taking the minds of the people off the testing message for this time. I have written to him and told him that he was showing himself not fit to be president of this general conference. He was showing that he was not the man to keep the presidency. If this message of the daily were a testing message, the Lord would have shown me. These people do not see the end from the beginning in this thing. This work they are doing is to divide the people of God, and to take their minds off the testing truths for these last times. I utterly refuse to see any of them who are engaged in this work. The light that was given me of God is that Brother Daniels has stood in the presidency long enough. He was there as long as God wanted him there. When he comes here and switches the people off as he has, the Lord has no more use for him as the president of the General Conference, and I was told not to have any more conversations with him about any of these things. I would not see Daniels about the matter, and I would not have one word with him. They pled with me that I would give him an interview, but I would not give him any at all. They have stirred up the minds of the people about these things. God is testing these men, and they are showing how they are standing the test, and how they stand with regard to the testimonies. They have shown by their actions how much confidence they have in the testimonies. I was told to warn our people not to have anything to do with this thing they are teaching. They are to give no attention to it at all, as there is nothing in it that amounts to a single thing. They must have something that no one else has. There is no test about this matter. There is no life and death question about it. Its purpose is simply to distract the mind, and to divert the attention away from the truth for this time. You see, there is nothing to it, and the light that was given to me was that I was forbidden of the Lord to listen to it. I have expressed myself as not having a particle of confidence in it. I saw how that they had a paper in their hands, and they wanted to get a hearing on this question at Loma Linda. But I saw I had nothing to do with it, and there was nothing to be done about it. I saw why it was that Daniels was rushing this thing through from place to place, for he knew that I would work against it. That is why I know they did not stand the testing. I knew they would not receive it. The time has come when his presidency should come to an end. He has been in too long. This whole thing they are doing is a scheme of the devil. He has been president too long and should not be there any longer. F.C. Gilbert, An Interview with Sister White at St. Helena, June 8, 1910.
The whole thing indeed was a scheme of the devil. As I stated previously, Ellen White framed it as not being a vital question because all sides at the time believed that God's justice demanded the death of the sinner and that the blood of Jesus was needed as appeasement. In this context, there was nothing in it. But why was the devil working so hard to move Daniels and Prescott to change the view of the daily? Because it would weaken the foundations of the movement and place doubts over 1844. It also would block the true implications of the old view of the daily when understood in the light of the 1888 message. Daniels claimed that he saw Ellen White in 1910, but Ellen White was refusing to see Daniels at this time, and there is no evidence that he had an interview with Ellen White at that time. Not only did she clearly state she would not meet him, but she wrote clearly to Daniels and others that he should not be president anymore. But Daniels would remain president until 1922, when he finally lost an election. As Daniels was the first to so successfully go against Ellen White and the pioneers, he set a model for how to bring in new theology. Thus, Daniels prepared the way for his prodigy Leroy Froom to act the part of Balaam in seducing Israel into sleeping with the daughters of Babylon during the Martin and Barnhouse interviews and the production of the book. Questions on Doctrine in 1954. The result of this liaison with the daughters of Babylon would ensure the following generations of Adventism would be illegitimate children who followed deeper and deeper into unity with Babylon. The apostasy would be of the same caliber as the apostasy at the Jordan in Moses' time, when Moab seduced Israel, causing a deep crisis to God's people and the destruction of many. Adventism would kneel before the God of Babylon in the form of the Trinity and continue to lift up her pagan sacrifice of appeasement, strange infatuation, bitter fruit, apostasy of the highest magnitude. This in turn prepared the way for Desmond Ford to expose the inconsistent position of Adventists on the sanctuary doctrine. Ford also highlighted important points from the book of Hebrews regarding Christ entering directly into the presence of God at his ascension. We will address these points in a later chapter. Daniels and Prescott had secured the minds of the majority of the leaders of the Adventist Church. After Ellen White's death, they pressed their advantage into the 1919 Bible Conference, where the subject of the daily was discussed again, along with several other topics including doubts about the authority of the spirit of prophecy and Christ not being begotten in eternity. It was important for us to consider this history in detail because we have been told that the correct understanding of the ministry of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary is the foundation of our faith as Adventists. Daniels and Prescott were moved upon by evil angels to lock in the principle of appeasement into Christ's ministry. Such a view prevents the cleansing of the sanctuary and therefore the second coming of Christ. I now wish to consider Daniel chapter 8 in the light of the 1888 message and pinpoint vital issues that will lead to the cleansing of the sanctuary.